Welcome everyone. This is episode 38 of the Transmaxxing podcast, and today's topic is gaining political power. Of course, the most straightforward way to do so is running for office, where you say what the voters want to hear, something that resonates with the masses, enough people to get elected. So here you have to study and see what actually gets people to show up and vote for you, and this will depend on where you live. So this is a good option for people who haven't disclosed their real views, because then you can pretend to believe whatever the voters want to hear. And then of course once you gain real political power, you can use that power to push your real agenda instead of what people voted for.
Yeah, I think it would be better if I was in charge. You feel me?
Yeah, so you need to find a way to get elected if you're not going to do a military coup or something.
It's true.
So
I think you need to start from the school, dude. Like from the bottom up. Get your school council. Bribe some people, maybe.
yeah,
Get
as
on
long
their
as
good side.
you don't get caught, that's an interesting strategy.
It's not interesting, it's just
Would
real.
you-
It's not being real. Like, I'm not gonna suck dicks for votes. Like,
Yeah, so
that's
you're
crazy.
already fucked, I think, but good luck with your ambitions, you're not going anywhere.
Look, I think actually, like, where I live, a military career is actually a good way to get political power. But I don't know.
I mean,
Yeah.
you gotta gamble on not dying when it comes to the military. I
No,
think you were
fuck.
right in the first place saying, build your way up being like class president, then like getting into like politics and law, and then going and becoming like a mayor or something else. I thought that was like a cool segue.
No, I think what people underestimate is the tiny portion of people in the army that actually serve in a combat role. Like, the chances of you dying are really not that high. It's
Yeah,
fucking
so
true.
your idea for gaining power is in the Israeli army, if you make a career there, you can gain a high position. I think the challenge is going to be to transition from that to gaining real political power. You have to do Al-Sisi, a military coup, which is risky.
No. Military coups don't work here. You gotta, listen, I don't know how it works. I just know you gotta be in the army for a relatively long time. You get up there, then you can pursue a political career. That's how it works over
Yeah,
here.
so you try to get elected after your military career, which is interesting. You might not be Machiavellian enough to pull it off, but good luck with your project.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So are you gonna go and find opportunities to go full Rambo, or are you gonna just try to slide doing the on duty shit and just be casual?
Listen, I'm not gonna be in the fucking front lines, that's for sure. Like, they're not gonna put me there. But I don't know. Like, in the army here, I feel like the average person gets disrespected. We barely get paid to serve. We throw the best years of our life on the army. But I mean, fuck it. At least we get a 50% discount in McDonald's. You feel me?
What's the joke?
You think?
It's not a joke. It's true. Like, my sister, she's in the army, and she was
You
like,
think
"Yo,
this
I'm at
could perhaps
McDonald's."
be related to America in some way?
Oh, to America, I don't think so. But hey, listen. Like, my sister bought me 12 chicken nuggets at half price. That has to count for something.
Yes.
I think
For
it's
real.
fucking awesome. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. How are you guys doing?
I'm
We're
doing
doing
the smart strategy, which is to slowly gain power outside the military, like with the Transmaxxing manifesto. And then as you grow, you can recruit more people, and then with those new people, they can in turn propagate your message further, and that way you gain influence over time. And then once you have like a power base, you can start to like gain real political power.
I mean, yeah, you definitely gotta play with social media, like TikTok and all that stuff, to get followers, to get people aware of your movement, of whatever you're promoting. But yeah, you definitely gotta use TikTok and Instagram and all that funny shit. You gotta like, that's how you get young people too, especially, which is like the most important demographic.
Yeah, absolutely. Social media is very important. It's really shitty to deal with though. Like, I would have like just avoided it completely if I didn't have political ambitions.
I think if people are very committed to it, they can relatively easily get political power. I mean, I don't think it's that much of an issue.
Yeah, you have to get people on board and grow your alliance and have people working together for a similar goal, and then you can start pulling the normies to your side as well because they just want something better than the other person. Don't really care too much about the details.
Yeah, I mean, if a popular uh, female Twitch streamer, like let's say on Twitch, wanted to, she could get an army of simps, dude, to like follow her to the death, I feel like.
There is this notion many people have that politics is something that you should like ignore, something that is maybe boring, and people are annoyed that they are constantly reminded of it, that everything becomes politicized. In reality, politics is actually very important, has a huge impact on your life and other people around you. So if you can in some way gain political power to change society for the better, that will be extremely valuable, and it's not something you should just give up upon because it's difficult. So, have you ever considered going into politics yourself?
Personally, I would say when I was younger, I thought about politics a lot, mainly because, well, in a way, like politics really do shape your lifestyle and everything. Like pretty much like as more time passes, like different laws become a thing or laws that become revoked, and you can start seeing like the aftermath or like a lot of the effects that it does like within either smaller communities to even your whole entire country.
Yeah, I remember when I was younger, there were like other people telling me how to think and stuff, and I was looking for like answers and stuff to follow. And like every time I did, I became like disappointed and I found out later this wasn't really what I wanted. But now I have a fairly good idea on what I want. I'm not sure if I will be able to gain political power in this life, but if I get the opportunity, I will certainly take it. And I already do have some power, even if it isn't official, via this community and my platform, so I do think I'd still have an impact on society, even if it is a lot less than I really want.
Yeah, I personally think that like any kind of outlet, like even if it's a smaller outlet, like in a way it has some kind of like political shaping. It always just takes a small message to get across for like another person to absorb, and then eventually they might propagate such message or at least be shaped by their ideals. So in a way, even like the smallest impact within like one individual has a lot of major impact worldwide.
There is this notion called the butterfly effect, where a very small initial effect can have a huge impact later down the line. There are many examples of like coincidental things happening because of something small. And with this community, with all these people being interested in Transmaxxing, it's actually a great opportunity to do have an impact on politics.
Yeah,
So,
I personally feel like, especially with like the recent documentaries and things done, like there has been a bit more spotlight thrown to like this notion, which was like probably like a couple years or even months ago, like seen as pretty niche. And I feel like that's just to show like how even like smaller movements and such as things, like they slowly start making larger impacts out in the world, which is why personally, like if you want to have like a different kind of like political realm to like dominate like either local or even at a national level, like it would have to do a lot with like what kind of work you put into it to see such things happen.
Yeah, and it's very important that you do not have to join either major political camp, like you don't have to become a Republican or Democrat. I'm not saying you should vote for a candidate of either party. If you feel like some candidate is so closer to what you want, sure, go ahead and vote for them if you want to do that. I'm not stopping you. But you don't have to advocate for any existing ideology if you don't want to. You can create something completely new. And this is what I did with Transmaxxing and earlier with Vintology. Actually creating new ways of thinking and new approaches that people weren't considering before. And sure, it was small initially and it was hard to gain traction. But because I put so much effort into my ideology, what I want to do, and it was very well thought out, and it offered something people actually wanted, I started gaining traction. And then as you gain more people to your movement and more people who feel like they benefit from being a part of your group, then you can gain more people to spread it further, so you can actually get something like exponential growth that way, because the more people you attract to your movement, the more power you can gain. And because of that possibility to grow exponentially, you don't actually have to start off at any significant size. If you just can grow and gain more and more followers, even if you are just one person initially, eventually can become something really great, and you can potentially gain control over the country you live under, or at least be a part of the official government later down the line if you play your cards correctly. I'm actually going to lay out some strategies here for gaining power. So the basic approach is that when you do gain some political power, it can be over media, it can be that you have some major company you control. You use that power to gain even more power as a feedback mechanism. If you gain control over some court, for example, you're the judge here, then you can use that power you have as a judge to screw over people you dislike. In America, you cannot officially go after people for hate speech, but maybe they have done other stuff that is illegal, and then you can go after them that way. So if you are creative, you can really win more and more power. And I think the key here is that you have to be willing to go authoritarian. You have to be willing to actually flex your power to gain even more power. And the reason why the left and liberals often lose is because they're not willing to do so, or at least not efficiently. So they might gain some power, but then they lose at the next election because they didn't go after their opposition.
Yeah, personally, like if we look through like history, feel like even if you have more of libertarian views and like you don't want to embrace any kind of authoritarianism, unfortunately, like it's mainly always been like authoritarian either politics or authoritarian regimes that pretty much always have an upper hand, and that's mainly because like they easily silence any kind of voice that goes against their agenda, or like they will do pretty much anything to gain like major political power. So I would say, like, even if you are not a supporter of authoritarianism but want to gain political power, you might have to implement some of those things. Like, for example, even in the book of The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, there's actually a pretty famous quote, like, I don't remember exactly the quote, but you prefer like people to fear you rather than love you, because when the people love the ruler, like there will always be somebody with a knife behind your back. But also like if you have a fear towards a ruler, like it will be a lot difficult for someone to actually hold a knife behind you, pretty much.
Yeah, the problem is that even if you are well liked, there will be so many people who want to overthrow you anyway. And the problem is that if you are too nice to people, you might spare political opponents, and then later on they will commit a revolution against you. For example, Adolf Hitler was actually imprisoned for a while because he tried to overthrow the government, and then later on he was let out and then he gained power in via democratic means because he wasn't stopped. But they had been more authoritarian in the Weimar Republic, they would then have stopped the Nazis from taking over. And there will be no Holocaust and no Second World War. But this is the consequence that will happen if you do not embrace authoritarianism. There will be other people gaining power instead, and then you're kind of screwed because sure, right now we can vote and stuff and protest, but the moment an authoritarian gains power, it ends that for good often. And then you're kind of screwed if you try to oppose it because you just get killed or imprisoned or like humiliated in some way. Forced to like above your views on state television or whatever.
Yeah, like there is a common saying that says it's always good to fight fire with fire. And honestly, like I feel like especially a lot of like the fascist regimes from like the 30s and 40s could have easily been repelled, like if the left leaning side would have adopted a little bit more authoritarian views. And it's pretty much what led to like the mass control of like these dictators in Europe throughout like the earlier middle half of the last century.
Yeah, there are many examples of like dictators now who gained power via democratic election, like even Putin got elected democratically initially and was actually fairly popular. I think maybe the next topic can be, let's say you already have control of a government and you crush the opposition. It's like you and the Politburo controlling everything. Then the next step is of course to expand your borders, and the reason for that is that if you do not expand your borders, you will allow hostile forces to have power in other areas. And eventually will be able to invade you, so you really have to be aggressive when you have an opportunity to gain more territory. And of course you have to wait for the right moment, and it's easier if you're a part of some major alliance. So let's say for example you want a piece of some territory, maybe you will be able to team up with some other country who will invade at the same time. And then you will have a bigger opportunity to win, and it will be harder for the like countries to oppose you. It will also help a lot if you have nuclear weapons, because then you can deter other countries from getting too involved, and then you get away with like expanding your borders more easily. Like especially America, it makes no sense for an American authoritarian government not to like expand the borders, like take over Canada or something, like why not? Here's actually something really important. You need to be a person who likes to be like a god empress or something, who likes having that power over other people and being a figurehead. If you are like a libertarian who don't like the state, it will be harder, of course.
That would describe me pretty well, and I think for people like us who maybe feel like we can't really aspire for that sort of political power, the best we can do is try and create grassroots change, just change hearts and minds. I mean, it's a slow process that really doesn't have much rewards for the people doing it, but I think it can lead to positive outcomes at the end of the day.
Yeah, but I'm not a libertarian, by the way, so I want to use power over other people to influence society. I'm not really interested in like limiting the power of the state, because that's not even possible in the first place. Like, if you actually try to do that, you just end up with like gangs and stuff. We gain power instead because the state was too weak. It's pointless even try.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. It's like, it seems like at least with our current system, you're definitely correct. Like, there's not much that you can do to influence society if you don't have that sort of political power. But I do think that some sort of underlying cultural movement can slowly influence policy, though oftentimes in unexpected or unwanted ways.
Yeah, I think we should go into how you can indirectly affect the country you live under, and the way to do this is pushing culture. For example, the Transmaxxing manifesto is a great example of wielding cultural influence over people. And this is kind of two-front war, by the way, because you are pissing off the feminists on the left and the feminists on the right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Transmaxxing manifesto is a great example of that. Like, the way it's written, it's like, you know, having things like anime recommendations on the front page. It makes it kind of like a cultural talking point and a sticking point for people reading it rather than just like a super serious, like, political document that most people would just ignore. Because it ultimately, like, it is about changing those people's hearts and minds slowly through memes and through cultural streams and just slowly trying to gain relevance.
And here I think I actually learned that over the time, because I actually tried doing purely political, very serious writings in the past and people ignored that. So then I did with Transmaxxing, I included memes and anime and stuff, and then people paid attention to it. And then of course I included all the serious stuff in between the memes and the anime.
Yeah, it just seems to be the way our society is going. You need to do those sort of things to appeal to the common man, common woman, so to speak.
Something you can actually do even if you're a libertarian is if you get selected for jury duty. Of course, if you're a questioner or whatever, you pretend to be like a dumb normie or whatever, but then when it comes to vote, if you don't want the person to be convicted, you vote not guilty, and if you want them to be convicted, you vote guilty, and it's that simple. You don't have to do it according to the law, you can just vote how you feel.
Yeah, I mean, being on the jury is definitely a method of power because you can create things like precedent that influence not only that specific case, but the future of criminal justice and just societal trends in general through your jury service. So I think it's valuable if you do get selected for jury service to take the opportunity if you feel like you do want to exert some sort of political power in this world.
Yeah, and to be clear, you can actually do it in both directions. So for example, let's say there are some transphobe who is like known for pushing hate speech. Then if you get selected for jury duty and they are accused of some crime, you will try to convince the other jury members that they are indeed guilty, even if you don't believe it yourself, to screw them over as hard as you can. But then on the other hand, if you really don't want someone to get convicted, even if they're clearly guilty, then you vote not guilty as you remember, regardless of the evidence. And then you will actually prevent the conviction, because it just takes one dissent to stop the entire thing. It's kind of stupid to be honest, but it's a stupid system we should exploit if you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty silly. You just gotta, during jury selection, just pretend you're oblivious, pretend you're normal, and, you know, by the time you reach the trial, you being tried in the case, like, you can exert any sort of unjust influence on the case that you so please.
Yeah, and you can do it two ways. If you just want to like screw up the prosecution and like prevent the conviction, you can just silently vote no. But you can actually go further and try to influence all the jury members as well and convince them that the person isn't guilty, or in the other way, depending on if you like them or not. Like, fuck the law, we don't care about that here.
Yeah, if you've got the power of persuasion on your side, you can basically sway everyone in the jury.
And often prosecutors will be more than happy to help you, like convince people that someone is guilty even if they're innocent. And then often judges, they can be like fairly judgmental as well. So it's often only jury members who can prevent that. So, Corvallis, have you ever considered running for office?
I don't think I've ever considered running for office, but I have thought of ways of like changing policies in a political atmosphere, but that might even require me running for office.
Yeah, I think it is something you have to consider. If you're like a nobody, it can be hard for like me and you because we are too known and our real opinions are well known by now. But yeah, if you're like a nobody, you can like pretend to have whatever the voters want to hear and then get elected that way.
I think for those of us who have even like a semi-apparent public image, like it's going to be very hard for us because, I mean, people can dig up and people can find our beliefs and people can find the things that we've said and posted, and it would be very difficult to sort of craft that narrative.
Yeah, it's too late for me and many people here. This is something you have to consider early on and then be very disciplined throughout your life. And of course, if you instead want to more indirectly influence society, you really want to reach out to people. And here something very important is to reach out to people early in life. Because the younger someone is, the easier it is to convince them of something. But if they already have gotten indoctrinated into some religion or whatever, it's going to be way harder to convince them of something completely new. And typically what you can do is to have them accept new things that are false or contradictory with their old beliefs, but it's going to be very difficult to get them to abandon their childhood religion or whatever. So instead you have to convince them of just voting correctly, and that's pretty much everything you can do. So this is why conservatives are freaking out when you're like talking about trans stuff to young people, because they want to indoctrinate them first and convince them that they're going to hell if they transition or whatever.
Yeah, it turns the one-step process of political indoctrination into a two-step process because first you have to deprogram them from their existing beliefs and then you can introduce new beliefs to replace their existing belief structure.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, you often cannot even do this. You have to like reconcile it somehow. So for example, with Christianity, you can convince people that the Bible isn't anti-transition, it's actually pro-transition if you like read it verse or whatever. It's going to be very hard to convince someone to just abandon Christianity completely. Which is kind of sad because I've seen an example of people who will clearly benefit from transitioning, or even people who detransition because of Christianity.
Yeah, it definitely happens. It's pretty rough.
Of course, if you actually gain political power in a real way, we could actually set up re-education camps for people to really convince them that they have been indoctrinated. This will be a painful process to put people through to really remove all this indoctrination. And you can only really do this via authoritarianism. Like there's no like easy liberal way to get rid of like religion like Christianity from society when it's deeply rooted and people really believe it. It will take a lot of brutal methods to really get rid of it quickly. Maybe if you do it slower you can maybe gradually get rid of it like in Sweden for example, but even then it will still like influence the culture for many years.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, like practically, it has to be a very slow process of cultural changes because, I mean, things like re-education camps are just not gonna fly in this day and age for most people.
I mean, if you have an authoritarian government, you don't really have to respect the majority, which is why it's more interesting, but the problem here is actually getting there. You have to first get elected and then have to like screw over the opposition and rig the next election after that and maneuver the bureaucracy correctly. Like it has been done in many countries, obviously we could do the same if we really wanted to. But I think the problem here is that often liberals and people who are like pro-trans don't want to do that stuff. Then there are the conservatives who are willing to really push stuff around and try to abolish democracy. This is like a losing game the liberals are playing. You have to be aggressive in pushing your ideology to really win. If you're not willing to take risk and be aggressive, you're going to be obliterated and lose that the brutal power game.
What do you think about like getting like just a lot of social influence where it's like a lot of people follow you for your word rather than just like real power? What is your opinion on that?
I think it's very much inferior to having direct power because it's very fragile. For example, right now I have some decent platform, but anyone can take that away at any moment. They can deplatform me from Discord, from Reddit, from YouTube, and then I'm back at square one pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, or the cultural tides could shift and suddenly you're just not relevant anymore and you're back to minimal viewership, minimal followers.
Yeah, it's a fragile type of power you can lose very quickly, and you can get like cancelled or whatever. Like there are many cases of that. And I think a great example of that is Vash, for example. He was like a left YouTuber, and then he was caught with lolly horse porn on his computer, and then he started losing following, and people stopped taking him seriously because of that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one like 3-second slip up and his career is toast, basically.
And to be honest, I don't think the same thing will have happened to me because Wash preached like a feminist ideology where it's like the worst thing to watch lolly porn or whatever. I don't really care, to be fair, but the thing is like
Yeah.
according to his like moral view is like the worst thing, so
Yeah, it definitely depends on your audience, and like for him, yeah, that's like his audience thinks that's like the greatest crime, the greatest sin one can commit.
I'm fairly lucky that my audience kind of have similar views regarding important topics as me. There is no real thing I'm trying to hide from people here. Like I'm actually pushing what I actually believe in. I'm not like merely trying to gain an audience. This might be the difference between me and other people. While I am more confident and willing to confront people and stuff, because I actually believe in what I am saying to people.
I think people who are drawn to the realness are more likely to be accepting of views that they might not agree with as well. So even if there is some stuff that they find questionable or incorrect, they can just, see the rest of your work for what it is and see the rest of what people say here for what it is.
Yeah, and this community, we are fairly accepting of people having different views, like even if it's radically different from me. Of course, there are regulations of speech here and stuff, but we still accept people who believe different things fundamentally. And this is not really because of any ideology I have regarding free speech, it's just practical that way because it grows our audience and the number of people here, and it allows important discussions that are interesting.
Yeah, I think it's kind of at that sweet spot where it doesn't get moderated to the point where people start basically leaving because they're not allowed to say anything, but also it doesn't go in the other direction where, we just allow these like freaks to say whatever they want here.
You also shouldn't advertise that stuff too much because it will attract Nazis and other bad people. So if you actually have real free speech, you have to kind of hide it from other people to avoid attracting the worst types.
Yeah, I mean, some level of gatekeeping, at least perceived gatekeeping, is required.
Another thing you can do is to kind of go around legislation. For example, if they restrict access to HOT, you can provide people with access to DIY HOT instead. So kind of circumventing legislation that way.
Yeah, I think that the whole DIY thing is a powerful grassroots step because ultimately, the more trans people there are, the more power we will have in society, just on a numbers basis. And at this point, it's like something like 20% of Gen Z is identifying with LGBT, and it seems like that number is only going to be growing. So I can see the influence of transmaxing and just the transgender movement in general growing exponentially with time over the next 5 or so years.
Yeah, this numbers game is actually very relevant because the more people you have, the harder it will be for politicians to ignore us. Which is, by the way, why the transmed types are so stupid. really like shooting yourself in the foot hard.
Yeah. Exactly. I was just about to say that, yeah, they're just limiting their own potential power by trying to limit the power of others and limit the identity of others.
And something I have to consider as well, because when I wrote a Transmaxxing manifesto, original I didn't really consider the non-binary option. But that might actually be something we could do next, like NB maxing or something.
Yeah. I think that maybe just this sort of genderless identity could be empowering for a lot of people, and it would kind of create a society where just the idea of gender itself is less normalized, as in the masculine and the feminine stereotypes become less normalized, and basically the floodgates open for all sorts of different presentations and ultimately even like transhumanist ambitions.
I actually think that even if you allow people to like freely choose whatever presentation, there will still be a lot of people who go for something really feminine because they like that, like with cis people and trans people. There will be some who really like that very feminine, clearly female presentation. But then there will be all those people in between that are kind of more normie types who just do whatever.
Yeah, do whatever they feel comfortable with, and I think that would greatly benefit them as well, because a lot of pressure that they would normally face would just start to fade away.
And then when we have this greater alliance, we can use that to really benefit ourselves. I think this marks the end of episode 38 of the Transmaxxing podcast. I hope that you will have a nice day forward and that you will gain a lot of power if you one day run for office. Goodbye everyone!